Hello, self-care for performers. We're back for day 14 of my embodiment challenge for myself, daily embodiment practice. This challenge has been simultaneously a challenge for me to keep up with because of the vulnerability that embodiment practices asks of the embodier. There are a lot of different ways one can practice embodiment, and it is kind of like a hot topic word these days. And I'm so grateful for that because there's so much of what I've done throughout the course of my career, my life, my practice, my being, breathing as a human, that this word helps to be inclusive of, that I didn't have a word for before. I was like, I don't know, how is something I do? It's like the space between acting and dance. And it's this lusciousness that like, it's the all of the why I love the performing arts. And so embodiment is sort of that nugget, that piece. And for me, embodiment also is inclusive of a sort of ceremonial or ritual kind of relationship with how we enter into a relationship between our mind, our heart, and our gut, meaning making or mission or our relational dynamics that we have. And finding that peace for me really also allows the integration of, which we worked with a little bit in a book on polyvagal exercises. The vagus nerve connects from the base of the brain into the heart, splits off, and also connects into the gut. So you've got your mind, your heart, and your gut all connected there. And there's a lot of spiritual teachings throughout the ages that talk about integrating those aspects of oneself. And what I love is that there's an actual nerve that controls our autonomic nervous system that is sort of the receptor and the interpreter of safety, threat, etc. And it is what unconsciously throws us into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all of that, all those coping strategies or defense mechanisms that the body will kick into gear. And then you sort of your prefrontal cortex, the part that is your executive function that helps you decide and choose and bring cognition online. Oftentimes that kind of goes away. We come back into more of they call it like the reptilian mind, but it's back and down. But you come back down and in, and that's where a lot of that content of, some people call it like the lower brain, but that more baseline animalistic reactive as response. So it's less choice oriented and more pattern based and instinctual. And what I love about polyvagal theory is that there's an awareness too that the vagus nerve, it automatically, our autonomic nervous system, it automatically controls things that we need to keep our life force going. So all of our organs, as well as our breath. And then the breath, which I've probably mentioned in another video, but we'll repeat it in case you haven't seen that or those. And also it's just good to always practice and return to the core concepts of aspects of what it is that I want to bridge into increasingly within this project, Self-Care for Performers. And this is one of those things. So, but the breath we can also consciously adjust. And there's breath work that has also been a part of cultures across time throughout the world. There are all sorts of different breath patterns. There are ways in which you can utilize breath to go deep into the subconscious or to bring your consciousness back online. And so depending on the kind of breath work you're doing, you can create and cultivate a certain kind of directional healing or relationship with your process, your practice. I do use breath and body and vocal practice, but more intuitively and based off of just what I've been held space for and then what feels right in the moment, because I work very somatically and intuitively of what I think might help in that moment. So this has been a strain for me in some ways with this project, Self-Care for Performers, because so much of what I do is moment to moment based and sort of create as you go. Yet at the same time, I'm often pulling from a wealth of history of practicing with different people. And sometimes they share things with me that I'm sure come from a lineage that maybe I don't know, or I've received the same exercise from multiple different people. But maybe they call it different things. And as a dance educator as well, this is something that I ran into as challenging a lot when I would teach, which is that, like, what's mine, what's not mine? How do I talk about it? They say you're supposed to credit your sources. And also sometimes you have such a diversity of resources and sources you're pulling from to create one thing that it's like, how do you, like, if I spent my time doing that, all I would be doing would be crediting resources, and I wouldn't give myself the opportunity to breathe into what wants to be birthed in the moment, because I'd be spending so much time accounting for the lineage. So that's a challenge that I have. And I'm just going to name that. I don't have a fixed answer for that, except that I will share with you when I feel able, when I'm pulling directly from something very specifically, I will share that, such as today, we are coming back into connection with last night's resource, which is The Art of Receiving and Giving the Wheel of Consent by Dr. Betty Martin with Robin Dalzen. And I love this book because it's all about intimacy practices. And now Betty Martin, I'm going to read to you about Betty. Dr. Betty Martin has had her hands on people professionally for more than 40 years, first as a chiropractor and upon retiring from that practice as a certified surrogate partner, sacred intimate, and somatic sex educator. Her explorations in somatic-based therapies and practices informed her creation of the framework, the Wheel of Consent. I am loving her framework and this Wheel of Consent. It's like a holding, like framework, right? Framework is there to hold, to orient, to allow you to play upon. Betty co-founded the School of Consent in 2018 and travels around the world teaching touch practitioners, therapists, and professionals how to create empowered agreements with their client sessions. And so as a former body worker, massage therapist, and also dance educator, where a lot of it is you put your hands on bodies, and we have a lot of cultural dynamics there that I've been working for a while to disentangle. And some of that for dance education specifically, I would have a lot of teachers tell me this, and you teach what you've learned. So there have been years where this is also sort of the mental framework that I've taught from, is that, like, if you don't want to be touched, don't come to dance class. And it's just part and parcel with what is needed. And while to some degree I still do understand that sentiment, because there might be lifts involved, there might be connection points with your partners in the dance moves, etc. I also am aware that both for myself and for my students, sometimes touch is not an option, and maybe it's for a day, and maybe it's because of something that's happened in the past that felt like a transgression, or was very specifically an abuse, and there needs to be agency and ownership over autonomy and clarity of body boundaries. The practice of navigating this wheel of consent, I think, is a beautiful way to integrate and bring into conversation some possible ways forward, as opposed to sometimes it can be challenging to just, I have this challenge. Sometimes, we are negativity biased animals, humans are. So we go into our negativity bias, and if something has hurt us, it's easy to just spiral into and down that, right? Without finding a different way through, and just get angry. And while anger is sort of a flag for us to note and be like, okay, something has crossed my boundaries, or I'm crossing my boundaries, but boundaries are not in place, and it is not okay. And there's some form of threat, whether it's psychological, mental, emotional, physical, structural, systemic, etc. But there's some sort of threat, and I don't feel like I have access to safety. It's important to know and note that. But okay, so coming back into this, I feel like this book is such a beautiful representation of how to find access to safety. And so I want to focus on that, as opposed to focusing on the transgressions and the lack of safety. I'm desirous of bridging more into the space of, well, how do we cultivate safety and consent and pleasure in our practices? Whether it's you creating your own experience of how you show up into rehearsal or into class or into a performance project that you were hired to perform in, or whether it's even if you are more here because you're a more spiritually embodied person and it's less about the actual performing arts, but more about the embodiment and how to navigate through the world when maybe you're a soulpreneur that has a degree of showing up into, this is who I am. Would you like to come work with me? There's an experience there. And that's a lot of what performing artists do. This is my capacity. Would you like to hire me? Would you like to work with me? Would you like to collaborate together? I would love to fill this role. Would you like me on that project? Also, though, there is a tendency that, and we're going to read about this in a moment, to really focus and fixate on what's the needs of the project? How can I serve the experience? And there's less of a degree of really cultivating safe space for us to ask ourselves as artists, as embodied practitioners, what would feel good to us? So we're going to read a little bit about that. Maybe we'll do some embodiment. Okay, so this is from page 303. 303, I love that number. Okay, I've been reading this chapter. It's the taking quadrant. So the taking quadrant, it's the wheel of consent. I think she divided into 4 quadrants, and it's this quadrant that's called taking. And she talks about taking, and this came up a little bit in my embodiment yesterday, taking as receiving, and taking as receiving within clarified boundaries. So you're not overtaking. So you don't have to worry about overstepping bounds or crossing someone's boundaries or all of the scary things that kind of come along that we hopefully don't want to do to somebody, and or truthfully might also exist a little bit in the fantasy component, because a lot of the sacred sexuality work that I also have entered into studying is the awareness that in our shadow selves, sometimes things we would never want in real life that would be absolutely horrendous, there might be a tinge of a fantasy that accompanies it, of like wanting to experience that in fantasy, even though like the real life experience is not something you'd ever want to happen to yourself or to somebody else. So there's this interesting dynamic there. And I think the performing arts and embodiment practices are a really fascinating space that allows the potential to explore that kind of content in safe ways if we do it with a lot of intention, a lot of clarity, a lot of boundaries, a lot of dialogue around how we're going to enter space to begin with, so that once we're in the space, we can feel held and oriented enough to know and trust that ourselves and our partners and the team or the crew or the production is going to respect those boundaries. I'm like nervous. Okay. When taking is hard or missing, whether it's in bed or in life, you may feel like there is no room for you. You're not able to take up the space that your body occupies. And I've had that come up so much with so many of my friends. They feel like they're not allowed to take up space. They feel like they have to shrink themselves. They feel like they have to shrink themselves and then be ready to jump to provide comfort for others. So if that's you, this is for you. It's hard to know what you want or that you want anything at all. The only way to let yourself do anything is to make it about someone else. So you think you are always giving. Gosh, I have that wound too. Do you have that wound? It's like, it's safer to give than it is to take. Even as sometimes we're like, I have to take. And then we cross a line where it's like, I have no resources. I have to take. How can I take? Right. And there's a question of, then it comes from a place of like almost desperation because there's nothing left. So here's some potential awareness around these dynamics. It may appear that you are generous or easygoing if you are that constant giver. But what is really happening is that you can't access your own desires. I'm going to say in physical intimacy. You feel like you're doing all the work. This may not be terrible, but there is a certain spark you cannot light. And I think that there is something that can sometimes happen too with our performance. If we choose the metaphor of like physical intimacy with like performance practice, we might feel that same, like I feel like there's something missing. And I know that I have more capacity than this, but There's a certain spark in my performance that I feel like I can't light. So on one extreme is passivity. You have trouble with self-care, eating well, and tending to your emotional, financial, and physical needs. I have that one. Anyone else? You live in fear of doing the wrong thing, so you do nothing at all. Also that one. Do you got that one too? How many do we share? Okay. You take no action for yourself, assuming that others know what to do or what you want. I've worked really hard to recover and recuperate that one. You have no agency and exercise no choice. Also, maybe overcorrecting that one a little bit on my end. So at times, sometimes when you haven't had access to agency or choice, like when you start practicing, it comes out really messy and like overly aggressive. This has been my experience, or really timid and like apologetic in the process. But the point is to learn how to practice coming from a place of like clarity, boundaried consent. At the other end of that spectrum, you reach out and take everything you can get away with. You're ruthless in business and relationships. You don't notice or don't pay attention to the fact that what you do has an impact on others. Do you find this happening in your life? And this happen, or do you see this happening in your career and how others treat their relationship to the performing arts? Because I have a sneaking suspicion that those of you who take the time to come here, and maybe you have past iterations of being like that, or maybe you cycle between the two. Usually, if you want to take the time to be this introspective, you are probably not the one that's just taking, or at least not as your baseline. And if it is, and if you are, then I want to say that also let's find a way through for you too. Right. So this isn't about judging. This is about finding a way through, for finding something different, finding something more satisfying for everybody involved. If you are unable to occupy the taking quadrant, you end up in the shadow of it. This is a matter of degree and applies to all of us. I love that. It really applies to all of us. The normalization of like these patterns being true. We all have times when we take without integrity in different areas of our lives, everybody. For one, it might be with affection and touch. For another, it might be in taking up attention. For another, it might be in a corporate decision to use up resources and leave a horrible, toxic mess. Often, it's invisible to the person doing it because they don't know the taking quadrant exists. Real taking cracks open the heart. If you are unable to access it, a certain part of the heart goes hungry. You don't know how to meet it, so you steal, grab, use, or manipulate in bed, in relationships, and in business, or in your performance practice. When taking is easy, quote from Eddie Curtis, Amit Ertegun. I really love your peaches. Want to shake your tree? Oh, I love that. Really love your peaches. Want to shake your tree. You know that one? Continues on. You might think that getting good at taking means you get good at grabbing anything and everything. The opposite is true. You get good at respecting others' limits and choices. You are able to trust that what you want is valid and ask for it without being attached to it. You have a beautiful combination of responsibility, desire, clarity, and respect that makes it easy to play with you or do business with you. In bed, you are sensual, confident, perceptive, and I would say in bed or as a performer, right? You are sensual, confident, perceptive, playful, and not afraid of yourself. You are able to take initiative and don't always have to wait for someone to start. So often performing artists, we wait for the project. We wait to be chosen. We wait, and we don't initiate. You are never stuck in a recipe. Technique has lost its allure because you are being real. I love that. People who are good at taking have a healthy practice of self-care. They eat well, take time to rest, and tend to their financial, physical, and emotional needs without taking advantage of others. They are able to recognize when their actions affect others and to check in with them about those effects. They are able to be firm on real needs like health and to bring other interests forward without being attached to them. And they are able to tell the difference. There's still more to go. Maybe we'll come back to that. But I do recommend this book. It's a beautiful book. It's a long, thick book, so we certainly won't get through all of it in these practices. And I don't know, I'm sort of feeling my way through what feels right when to bring into relationship. We did the first 10 days with Leah Guzman's book, Essential Art Therapy Exercises. And then we did, I think it was just 1 day, no, 2 days, Polyvagal Exercises for Safety and Connection by Deb Dana. And now this is our second day of The Art of Receiving and Giving, The Wheel of Consent with Betty Martin, DC. Okay, I'm going to embody something and then we're going to go. Maybe taking. I am now taking with integrity. I am now in the taking quadrant of the Wheel of Consent. I think that's it. I am now in the taking quadrant of the Wheel of Consent. What does this feel like? Wow. I'm aware that I'm like, I don't know this space. I don't know this space. I don't think there's anything to do other than like just be with that today. I don't know this space. And I can feel myself in this new space. And I can be tender with myself for knowing that I've been wanting to find this space for a long time, feeling like almost like tingles, when you're excited about something, you're like, ooh, and you get the chills and like shivers. It feels like that. So I'm just going to meet myself there in the wow. And I feel like rubbing my arms. And it's not like I don't need to get anything off. I feel like a lot of the brushing that I've done in a lot of the work I do is to like get it off of me. But this is like, no, like comfort myself, but also like acclimate to the new weather and like let my skin feel like it's integrating with the waters. I don't know if you have noticed this, but I love the water. Okay. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I love the water. But what I was going to say, I don't know if you've noticed this when you get into the water, but like when you get into the water, we have our little like body hair, some more than others, right? Sometimes in the little follicles of hair, we'll catch like little bubbles, little air pockets when you first get into water. And if you look down, you might have little bubbles attached to your skin. In like the hot tub or a pool or whatnot, relatively still water. And I used to love to like be able to look at it and be like, oh, let me brush the bubbles off. I'm sort of like releasing the old attachment. Like I was dry and in the air, and now I'm in a new environment in the water, in the wet, and there's still attached to me some remnants of the oxygen above. So in order to integrate into the water fully, I would just sort of rub those bubbles off. That feels sort of like what I'm doing today. So I'm just going to rub the bubbles off and let this be a little bit of time here. It's almost like I even want to like wipe the bubbles off of the walls in my room, in my apartment, in my living room, and just like feel what it's like to feel that. What could this be? How lovely and luscious could this be? And I'm just going to drink that in. Okay, this is it. I think this is the direction we're going. Creative intimacy, embodied intimacy, expressive intimacy, consent and intimacy, the art of receiving and giving. Some of us have over-practiced the giving, but I'm also looking forward to connecting into ways in which we can recover and recuperate some of the more spiritual components and the relational dynamics for what giving also means as a gift, not as a probably exchange or like a tit for tat kind of thing. This is my supposition. I just pulled to that page, so I haven't actually been reading it from the beginning to the end. Something asked me last night to just open to a page and it was the taking. And that's when I was like, this, like, it needs to be a part of the daily December experience. And I feel so much like it's allowing me to have some sort of framework, some sort of a clarity around how I can talk about something. It's scary though, because talking about intimacy, which is what I love, there's just so many different connotations, and there's so many different ways people can take things and run with things and whatnot. But I'm grateful to have someone like Dr. Betty Martin, who has done so much investigative work in her own practice and then created some sort of like a structural safety boundary, if you will, to navigate our relationship with these really loaded dynamics of giving and receiving and taking and sharing and gift giving and pleasure in our practice. So, and then translating that into your life and also into performing arts culture, creative culture, embodied, expressive relationship with one another. Also, a plug. And I'm going to see how these plugs, it's like I've been telling you how things are, how you can keep working with me. I'm curious to see how it continues to evolve, how I'm able to share that in increasingly artful ways. But I do have one-on-one mentorship connections that I would love to cycle with you through, which will include and incorporate a lot of this kind of work. And I would love to bring into the fold some of Betty Martin's concepts into how we can help you orient into safety in your own life, and then how we together can utilize the wheel of consent to think and talk about how we want to enter into a business relationship and how money dynamics might work, and the connection points of accessibility as well as value being reciprocal to match where the limits and resources might be. And then there's also the self-care garden, which it would be so lovely to have you there. And I'll continue to share printouts of what content I bring into practice, either excerpts or quotes from the books that I'm reading from, the practices and the prompts for entering into your own self-paced practice as a printable download, so that you understand the framework for which I moved through practice that day. And you can invite yourself into a framework like that, always with the permission to adjust and evolve as feels right and intuitively like a match card for your needs. Let me know what you think. And if you do become a member of the Self-Care Garden, there's a link to join the Facebook group. If you're already in the Facebook group because you are a member of my community that's been there for a while and you're following those videos, I would love to feel you there and to experience maybe little bits of notes. Maybe they're poems, maybe they're an account of how either witnessing my practice or entering into your own practice feels for you. As bravery grows within the community, I see this beautiful vision of us being able to share pictures and pieces and videos of what is meaningful for us in the moment and how we're relating with our life and our experience of pleasure and consent and boundaries and healing and integration and shadow holding and all of those things. So thank you for being here with me. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.